Back then, no one ever said out loud that we were poor, but strangely, every child just knew. There are things adults never need to say, yet we still saw them clearly. In their eyes, in the way they carefully wrapped up every single worn-out coin. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where the summer sunlight always slanted through faded curtains, casting shimmering patches onto the old wooden floor beneath the dining table. In the mornings, the radio crackled softly in the corner, while my mom quietly used an aluminum basin to catch the raindrops falling through the hole in the roof. Every time it rained, that soft dripping sound was like a quiet reminder our house was not like the neighbors. I remember my mom used to smile a lot, but it was a light kind of smile, and no one ever caught her complaining about anything. Still, I never once saw her buy anything for herself. And then one day I found out. That birthday cake, the tiny little one sitting in the middle of the table, was there because Mom had skipped 3 meals in a row. No one ever said a word about it, but I knew. Every evening was the same when dinner time came around. The whole family would automatically settle back at that rickety wooden table in the kitchen. It was so old that the slightest nudge would jostle someone's bowl into another's, spilling food across the table. Yet nobody ever complained. Dinner was usually simple, somewhat dry bread, a can of beans warmed up, and occasionally a bowl of thin tomato soup, watered down just enough to feed all 5 of us. Some nights, Mom would make a little mashed potato, spread a bit of salty margarine on top, then sprinkle pepper. A faint steam would rise before your eyes, and Billy would blow too hard, scattering black pepper across the table, making Tom try not to laugh out loud. None of it was fancy, but when you looked around, you saw a home dinner, chipped porcelain plates, napkins faded from washing mismatched spoons and forks. Odd together, yet somehow fitting. My father Henry would always reach for the best piece and push it toward Mom or me, as though it were a reflex already wired in his hands. Mom would wrinkle her brow slightly, saying, "You take it," but Dad would just nod and smile, his rough hand pulling back, and his slice of bread would still be thinner than everyone else's. At the time, I did not notice. As a child, you often assume that's how things should be. In hindsight, I hear now the unspoken gesture in him every time cutlery touched. Go ahead, you take it. The sounds of those dinners then were like an old melody, the sizzle of grease frying in a pan, spoons scraping the bottom of pots, making dry metallic notes, chairs scraping across the wood floor, Tom clearing his throat when telling a backyard story, and Billy whispering, counting his beans. Sometimes Mom would set the pot down too hard, and the table would tremble. The soup in the bowl would ripple small circles, and we'd all burst out laughing, as if the table had just cracked a joke. Mid-meal, Dad would ask about my schooling, a short question, yet full. "What did you read today?" I would answer slowly, trying to recall the name of the book I'd borrowed from the school library. The old smell of books was still in my nose, damp paper, worn covers, the must of time resting on a shelf. I would tell a simple story that nevertheless stayed with me, and Dad would nod, saying, "That's good." He did not say more, as though too much praise might somehow make the beans less tasty. Mom would still have the habit of giving me more when she saw my plate was empty. "You've grown up," she'd say, "eat some more." I wouldn't feel very hungry, but I'd accept it because in our house, refusing was a way of making someone sad. Tom would look at me with teasing affection. Let him eat, so tomorrow he'll run faster than me. and Billy would immediately drag me into some imaginary contest. Whoever ate more beans would have enough strength to make the table stop shaking. Of course, the table still wobbled and we still laughed. On hot evenings with no breeze, the fan would spin a few slow rounds, then stall we ate in the heavy, thick air of summer, that kind of summer, with cicadas singing, though no one was waiting for anything. Sweat beaded on Dad's brow, clinging to the darkened lines of his forehead. He'd quickly dab at it with his handkerchief, then smile at Mom. "Tomorrow will be cooler," he said like a small promise. We believed those small promises all through childhood. On cold nights, steam rising from the soup would fog Mom's glasses. She'd lower them, wipe them with the hem of her blouse, then put them back on, smiling. Now I can smell how good the food is. Dad would twist his spoon in his hand, eyes turned to the window, where dew had formed faint streaks. He often stayed silent before saying something kind. Once he said, "Someday, no matter where you are, don't eat alone if you can help it." I nodded, though I didn't understand yet, but in the years after life taught me that lesson one way or another. That wobbly table, strangely enough, never collapsed. It kept its balance, in its own way, much like our family, shaky but unbroken. Its edges were worn from elbows, resting on it from the times I copied homework there. Too much from Billy carving the first letter of his name with a knife, then hurriedly erasing it. Mom still covered the tabletop with a faded lace-edged cloth, as a gesture of respect to the loyal object that belonged to our home. I remember the smell of frying grease soaking into clothes, that lingering kitchen smell so strong that even when I went out to the porch to catch night air, I could still feel its warmth. I remember my mother's laugh when Billy knocked over a glass of water. She said, "Water spills, but there is still room in your heart," and Tom grumbled, "Next time I pour," but ended up pouring too full. Those small errors linked together, turning into untitled little stories. I grew up inside those stories. Occasionally a thin slice of ham would appear on the table like a secret gift. Mom would slice it so thin you could see through it, then spread it into 5 pieces. It looked funny, like the last red leaves of autumn clinging to a branch. Dad would push his portion over to Mom naturally, as though adjusting a scarf without much thought. I once assumed all fathers did that. Only later did I realize not everyone does. Now with my eyes closed, I can still hear the spoon hitting the bowl, hear the breath of the night slipping through the door crack. Those sounds were small, but enough for me to remember, like someone writing on your heart with pencil faint, but never erased. In the yellowed light on the windowsill, I saw beloved silhouettes bending close, eating and speaking softly, afraid to awaken something in the night. I don't know when I began to look at Dad's plate. That habit formed as lightly as breath, and it stayed with me through my youth. One time Mom boiled a few eggs for dinner. Kids like us always loved the creamy yolks. Dad peeled one egg, then placed it in my plate, saying, "You need it more." He gave one to Mom too, and he as always just took bread, dipped it in the soup, smiling. It was many years after that I realized I never once saw my father eat the egg, not until the year I left home for college. And that coat, that is another story starting in those days, when the wind cut your face, but the snow would not fall. That winter was dry, the ground cracked in fine crow's feet lines, like a stranger's handwriting in cold air, crept in through tiny cracks, making the house feel bigger, emptier. I needed a warmer coat than the thin fall coat whose shoulders were already worn thin. Mom said she would take care of it. That night, the sewing machine's pedal hammered like a heartbeat working in darkness. The wooden pedal moved up and down steadily. Mom's foot followed its rhythm, her hands carefully guiding the fabric. Under the presser foot, on the table lay scraps of cloth, waiting light gray from Dad's old pants, deep blue from a dress Mom had altered for someone else, brown stripe from a scarf that had torn. Mom arranged them like she was piecing together a map of our family, each scrap a warm memory. I sat beside her, chin in hand, listening to the sound of thread passing through fabric, breathing in the mix of new cloth and the lingering dampness of a kitchen just cooled a smell, pleasant like an old opened book. Mom sewed in the front pocket, lining it with a soft layer to protect my hands from chafing. I always liked tucking my hands in pockets, as if hiding the awkwardness of being small. When she came to the sleeves, she measured over and over. "Don't lift your arm. Jack," she laughed, "just breathe normally." I nodded, eyes watching the straight line. The needle pulled out so deft that I thought the needle must have its own little eye to find the path. "Your coat must be warm at the shoulders," she said, "because the shoulders carry the day." I heard it, but didn't fully understand at the time, only that those words warmed me even while the coat was unfinished. The next morning, the coat was done. It did not look like the coat sold at Mr. Walker's store, not smooth, not uniform in color, but look, it did like a quilt made from old seasons. But when I slipped it on, it fit me just right, light as a hand laid gently on your back, nudging you to step outside. Mom stood on the porch, straightened the collar, picked off loose threads, and rubbed my hands to warm them. I walked outside hearing wind whistle past my ears, but my skin felt held as though a small room followed me. At school, my classmates looked first at the coat, then at me. There were elbows, nudging quiet whispers, a few smiles. Kids are like that. Something odd is funny. I walked past rows of lockers, set my bag down, hung my coat. The scent of cold metal mingled with chalk, dust, paper, human scent together, creating the unique smell of winter in the classroom. The scent of trying that I still remember. I meant to sit quickly, shrink down so no one would notice. But then Mr. Cooper walked in. He looked at the coat on the hook as if it were a newly hung painting. He smiled, then said to the class, "Who has that unusual coat?" The class held their laughter. He looked at me. "Jack, is that yours?" I nodded. He nodded back. "Beautiful. I like those seams. They tell a story more than plain coats do." Then he walked around the class as though he had just hung a new map on the wall. A small moment like that stayed with me forever because it saved me from wanting to disappear into a locker. Now when I remember, I see the faces of classmates momentarily drooping, hesitant smiles fading. Not because they suddenly became kinder, but because someone grown up named what they had meant to mock unusual. A simple word that soothed childhood like a hand, shielding a gust of wind in the hallway. At recess, I buttoned up my coat and ran outside. Strong gusts tugged at my collar. I shoved my hands deep into the pockets and felt something soft, like paper. I pulled it out. Mom had sewn inside the pocket a small piece of cloth printed with a tiny rose, probably cut from some lining she had saved. I smiled to myself. Didn't tell anyone, as if I had just found a sweet secret. Maybe Mom thought a coat's pocket should be beautiful too, because her son would hide his hands there all winter. Back home, I hung up the coat behind the door, passed through the kitchen smelling the faint scent of fried shallots in the air, a warmth so strong I forgot that Outside, my hands had been freezing. Mom asked, "Did your friends say anything?" I said. "The teacher said it looked unusual." Mom raised her brow. "Unusual, is that good or bad?" I responded, "I think it is good." She looked at me, smiled in her eyes, a little light like the lamp on the table in a blackout evening, not blazing bright, but enough to brighten a whole face. I was not angry at the kids who laughed at me. It's true. At that age, people laugh before they understand. And sometimes even when older people still do that. But on that very day, I looked at Mom longer than ever. I looked at her finger joints stained from pulling thread, the red marks on her wrists from the pedal, the tiny safety pin still attached at the collar of her blouse like a trace of hurry before I left for school. She was brewing tea steam rising to flush her cheeks. "Chilly, child?" she asked. I shook my head no. I'm warm now. In the days after that, coat traveled with me to class, to the schoolyard, to friends' houses to borrow notebooks, to the corner store, to browse toys. On the way home, wind kept tugging while the coat held me upright. I learned to count my steps by the cracked pavement tiles, learned to memorize the patches of color on my coat sleeves, as if mapping the neighborhood around me. Sometimes just by glancing at a patch of blue cloth, I would know that was the evening Mom altered the neighbor's dress. Me and Billy, sitting beside her, fidgeting with thread, while Tom told spooky stories and we laughed. Time passed like how adults organize things into a closet neatly, sometimes too fast. I grew taller, my shoulders broader, my arms longer. Silently, Mom would loosen a bit here, add another patch there, and the coat would still fit. That winter passed too, leaving a few worn spots at the elbows. I asked Mom if she should replace the patch. She said, "Leave it be. What is already warm, don't rush to replace." Many years later, when I was working and had a family, I once returned home to visit and helped Mom clean out a corner of the closet. Among the old cardboard boxes, she pulled out a clear plastic bag inside which lay that same coat folded flat like a letter sent to the future. I reached in and touched its surface. The patches were still side by side, the stitches silvered but not broken. I smelled the old fabric, a smell of security. Mom spoke very softly as though afraid to stir memories. I just could not throw it away. I smiled, thinking quietly that some things are not meant to be worn again, kept to warm your memories. Then the day I married, before I left the house, Mom placed that coat into my hands. "You keep this," she said, "not to wear it, but to know how you were once warmed." I nodded, holding that coat as though hugging a piece of my childhood. And ever since then, whenever the wind blows, I open the closet, look through the transparent nylon, and see those old fabric pieces still talking to one another, gentle enough to make one think winter was never harsh. From that warm coat memory, my mind drifts to another afternoon, another kind of coat my older brother draped over my heart in mischief and love. I remember the backyard that day, sunlight dust drifting lazily like salt over an unbaked cake. A soft breeze enough for the calendar hanging in the garage to rattle against the wall. Clack, clack. I had just come back from school, my bag slung off one shoulder, and Tom was already waiting, hands hidden behind his back eyes, flashing a mischievous glance at me. "Come into the garage for a bit," Tom said, voice as though initiating a magic show. I followed, my heart skimming with the fragile hurt of not being invited to a classmate's birthday news I caught on the way home when kids were giggling about tiered cakes and balloons. I felt ashamed of my own sadness, so I just nodded, pretending I didn't care. The garage door opened a crack. Inside was Tom's private world. The scent of sawdust, motor oil, dry earth from old shoes hung on nails. On the low workbench, Tom had laid out a celebration, a loaf of bread, cut in half, laid neatly on a sheet of newspaper beside 2 cheap soda bottles, beaded with sweat. "Birthday, Tom?" "Declared yours." I laughed lightly, afraid if I laughed more, the sound would warp into something else. Tom took a small box of matches from his pocket. He broke one and stuck it upright in the middle of the loaf of bread. The red tip poked up like a shy bud. "This is the candle," he said, in the authoritative tone of a backyard leader. Then he pulled a strand of golden thread from Mom's sewing basket, tied it around the loaf like you'd tie a ribbon. I thought it was so funny I almost cried, a kind of funny that makes your nose sting. In a corner, Tom drew a birthday cake in colored chalk on the cement 3 tiers wiggly borders, tiny candles marked with yellow dots. He tore newspaper into fringe strips and draped them over a clothesline as makeshift decorations. The dark garage lit up with intention. There was no music, so Tom whistled a quirky melody, paused, and told me, "Make a wish." I lowered my head, eyes fixed on the red match tip. Tom struck another match, brought it to the candle. It flared for a moment, then went out with a puff, leaving the smell of burned match. "Blow it." Tom laughed, trying to sound solemn. "You have to blow it." I did blowing on a candle that was already extinguished, and we burst into laughter. That laughter echoed off the wood panels, bouncing back in multiple laughs, as if an invisible crowd were joining in. I bit into a piece of bread. Its interior was dry, but inside was a thin slice of butter Tom had secretly tucked in, and the saltiness melted like comfort. We clinked our soda bottles' cheers loudly, as though in earnest. Tom pointed to the chalk cake and said, "Too many guests, we won't get to eat it all." Then he produced 2 foldable paper hats, placed one on me, the brim sticking up like a baby bird's beak. I looked ridiculous, but Tom was so serious I believed it was a real party. He made up a few birthday wishes. "May you grow fast like grass after rain. May you run faster than Mr. Neighbor's dog." He laughed with each line, but his eyes watched me, waiting for something, perhaps a genuine smile. We laughed heartily, as though we'd never been hurt by anyone. Then suddenly, silence filled the garage. Tom sat on the door threshold, looking out into the yard, and softly said, as if speaking to his shadow, "They don't know you're happy just because I remembered." Not a complaint, not blame, just a comment like a needle sliding under skin, quiet but sharp. I sat beside him in silence. Wind brushed through the cracks. The newspaper under the loaf rustled like grass. At that age, there are moments you realize love needs no props. It makes its own light, its own fireworks, its own music. I watched the sunset streak fade on the cement floor, the dust motes still drifting, and I felt I was at the center of a birthday the universe had thrown, using the old garage as the banquet hall. That evening I took off the paper hat, folded it neatly into a pocket, a secret memento. Tom brushed off his hands. "Party's over," he declared. "There'll be another party tomorrow, theirs." I nodded, feeling a strange peace. As I walked out, I glanced back. The half-eaten loaf sat there, the burnt match stuck in its top like a small ship docked at shore. I walked across the porch, feeling as though I'd just crossed a narrow bridge between 2 childhood shores. Maybe tomorrow no one would invite me again. Maybe next week there would be others' parties I was excluded from. But tonight, amid the scent of wood oil and Tom's crooked whistle, I had a party to remember. I think that day was the first real birthday I ever had. From that garage party memory leads me down the gravel path toward the top of the street to Mr. Walker's General Store, the place where just standing outside and smelling wood feels like someone has opened the door on a slow afternoon. The wind chime hung on the door frame rang a clear kang, then fell silent as though listening for footsteps. The wooden floorboards creaked, creak under shoes, each step stirring a thin golden dust. That store was not large, but it held a whole town, old candy in glass jars, red and white lollipops, bundled upright cheap cookies lined up on shelves. On the other side, boxes of screws, coils of rope globe light bulbs, a few rolls of wire. At the far end, Mr. Walker stacked empty milk cans into a tower not to sell, but for the children's delight, as if the sight alone quenched thirst. On the counter, a large, lazy cat stretched, sometimes flicking its tail as though sweeping away rays of sunlight. I often stopped by after school. I rarely bought much, maybe one cheap corn candy or a small bag of peanuts. But what I really came for was to stand in front of the glass display. Right in the middle was a toy car, ocean blue body metal frame, white doors, black tires with silver rims, its nose a bit blunt in the style of cars from years ago that Mr. Walker used to tell stories about. It did not honk, beep, beep, nor ran by itself, but under the fluorescent lights, it looked like it was ready to roll down any road, even the road inside a boy's imagination. Whenever I stood there, I placed both hands on the cold glass edge. My eyes traveled from hood to door handle to the tiny grill. I watched my distorted reflection in the glass, then walked away before Mr. Walker asked, "Do you want anything?" I always shook my head, pretending to think. I did not dare ask the price, not because I feared it was expensive, but because hearing a number might confirm something already known. I could not reach it. Mr. Walker spoke little. He moved slowly, as though he believed the wall clocks in his store would always tick through time at his place. One day, while stacking nails into boxes, he paused, glanced at me, and smiled behind his beard. "Nice car, huh?" I nodded. "Yes," I said softly. He nodded. "Leave it there, don't let dust gather." I did not know whether he meant that for the car or me, as someone telling what's love to be kept careful. The store smelled distinct, dry wood, wrapping paper, old candy floor polish, faint whiffs of rain when someone opened the back door. I could close my eyes and still know where I was. The price sign written in chalk, hanging outside, always had one letter smudged by wind. Mr. Walker would carefully rewrite it, the chalk curves, fat and round, as though to keep everything stable. When no one else was around, I studied that toy car so well I knew every tiny chip in its paint. I imagined my name on the door, the sound of tires rolling along the street past fields, my hand on the steering wheel. Each imagination was like dropping a coin into a piggy bank. It made no noise immediately, but grew somewhere deep in my chest. One day a classmate came by, looked at me and laughed. "Buy it, Jack, don't just stand there like a statue." I smiled back. "I'm waiting for the price to drop." He shrugged, nodding knowingly. Good things rarely go on sale. I did not argue. Outside, the afternoon sunlight dripped like honey from the edge of a roof, and I leaned forward to peer through the glass one more time. The toy car still sat motionless, like an answer waiting for me, not mine yet. In the weeks that followed, I kept visiting as though meeting an old friend. One day, Mr. Walker placed a small note beside the car. "Fragile, please do not touch." I stepped back a half step, still glad that note existed to protect what I loved, and strangely, the more I looked, the more afraid I became to ask aloud. A question might spoil the silent ceremony. Like dipping into a still pond, the ripples would erase the sky mirrored in its depths. Then Christmas came. The store hung a strand of warm yellow lights. Their reflection on the glass made the car shine brighter. Mr. Walker played an old Christmas tune. The piano notes trembled gently, as though he were gathering snow outside his door. I stepped inside, the doorbell tinkled. He looked at me, nodded. "Hello there." I replied, my hand already drifting to the glass edge as if moved by a memory my body remembered before my mind. I looked around. The glass case was slightly different. The car was no longer in its old spot. My heart skipped a beat, like missing a step when you think there's another stair. I darted my eyes across the shelves, saw nothing. "You sold it," I blurted out for the first time, allowing myself to ask. Mr. Walker smiled under his beard, shook his head, then bent and opened the wooden cabinet under the counter. He placed a small box wrapped in newspaper on the counter, tied with twine. "For you," he said. Why, I asked, confused, afraid I'd misheard. "It's Christmas." He shrugged, like the season itself was made for giving things that don't always need a reason. I held the box. It was just heavy enough to know what was inside wasn't a dream. Mr. Walker added in a matter-of-fact tone, like reading from a price list, 35 cents. "But let's say you've been making payments all this time. Take it home and open it." I stood frozen in the warm yellow light, my hands burning. The cat on the counter lifted its head, looked at me, then closed its eyes again. I thanked him, stepped outside, and the door jingled "Kang" again. This time that sound felt like it cut the invisible string between me and the glass case. Back on the porch, I untied the twine. The newspaper rustled as I unfolded it, the scent of old ink rising like the smell of something waiting to be kept safe. Inside was the ocean blue toy car, just as it had looked in the display, but now it belonged to me. I placed the car on the windowsill and gave it a little push. The wheel rolled once, then stopped. I sat down next to it, propped my chin on my hand, and listened to my heart keep going. That night I slept with the box next to my pillow, as if I had tucked a piece of my heartbeat inside so it wouldn't race away. The next morning I showed it to Tom. He examined it for a bit, nodded beautiful, then tilted his head. "You remembered to thank him, right?" I nodded already, imagining the day I'd be old enough to repay him, maybe with a new light bulb for the shop, or just by standing a little longer to ask, "How are you today, sir?" The next day I went back to the store. Mr. Walker was rearranging a stack of milk cans. I said thank you. The words came out slow but firm, like laying bricks. He smiled. "Toys need someone to play with them. What's the use of just sitting on a shelf?" And suddenly I understood sometimes adults need to see the things they let go end up in the right hands, like a quiet destination for kindness. Since then, every time I passed by, I still heard the king in my head and could picture the little blue car rolling in a slow circle somewhere in memory. There were so many things I once didn't dare ask, afraid the answer would shut a door that was only half open. But that toy taught me something some doors open all on their own, right on time without needing a knock. And in the winters that followed, when I saw Christmas lights twinkling on the streets, I still heard Mr. Walker's voice, hoarse like old wood, saying sometimes prices are just excuses for people to give each other joy. I kept that toy car for a long time. The paint chipped around the handle, the wheels grew squeaky with dust. But the older it got, the more it resembled the story it carried, the story of a boy who stood before a glass case too afraid to ask. Until one year, when my own son opened his birthday gift and found the little blue car inside, he let out a laugh. He pushed the car across the floor, the wheels rolling made a sound like a tiny bell. I smiled, knowing that a toy has two lives: the life of painted metal and the life of joy warmed by someone's hand. And if anyone asks how much I will tell them exactly the words that sealed the scent of wood, old candy, and warm yellow light into a memory 35 cents, I know, because the owner gave it to me on that Christmas. After the blue car in the glass case, and that warm Christmas, my memory turned down another path where blue fades and wind stings cheeks. It was a silent afternoon with no warning when my father came home earlier than usual. He pushed open the screen door with a dry creak, set his metal lunchbox on the top step like he was placing down a day that's just ended. His boots, caked with dust and dry from rain, thudded onto the porch. He sat outside, no cigarette lit, no words, just gazing into the darkening sky, where a few stars had not yet dared to shine. On the yard, blades of grass bent, with the wind brushing each other softly, as if whispering. Mom opened the kitchen door and looked out her hands, still smelling of soap. She did not ask right away. Some questions, if asked too soon, are like pulling a thread that unravels the whole fabric. She turned back, changed her apron, and turned on the lamp above the sewing table. The treadle pedal of the sewing machine resumed its steady rhythm, more urgent than on any other night, stronger than any other night, as though striving to push our family's boat through a stretch of rough water. I stood in the door frame, not yet old enough to fully understand, but old enough to sense something slipping away from the grown-up's hands. Tom leaned against the wall, glancing toward the porch. Billy sat on the floor, tracing a line through the dust, with his finger spelling his name, then erasing it. The house no longer welcomed laughter creeping in. Instead, there was a silence weighted with presence so heavy that every chair scrape sounded loud. Father sat for a long time. Over him, the porch light drew moths, and they darted into the glow as though believing it a different sky. His coat was folded neatly. Both hands rested on his knees. The fingers, tanned from work, tapped softly. Occasionally he cleared his throat, not from smoke, but as if something was stuck in his throat, something with no name. When it was time to eat, Father said, "Go ahead," his voice firm like an old rope, still strong enough to hold a boat. We ate slowly, spoons, tapping bowls gently as though afraid to disturb something. I saw Mother eat less, her hand always near the sewing machine, as though ready to turn back if called. Tom scooped a larger portion to Billy, whispering, "Eat more." No one directed me, but I ate faster too, as though speed could make time pass, twice as fast. Night fell, wind slipped through door cracks, carrying the scent of damp earth from the empty lot. Somewhere far off, a freight train's horn echoed low drawing along a wave of gentle sorrow. Father remained on the porch. I, unable to bear the silence, thick as damp blanket, did a small trick. I pulled out an old umbrella and opened and closed it repeatedly, pretending it rained. No one laughed. Embarrassed, I folded it, sat on the steps, with a space between me and Father, just enough distance for a question I did not dare ask. By late night, Mom was sewing continuously, stitch after stitch, the sewing machine's hum urgent like a heart fighting to keep its rhythm. Mom's shadow stretched on the wall, gaunt but steadfast. I felt a new kind of fear, the fear of grown-ups being silent. Back then, I thought people were frightening only when angry. Later, I learned they are most frightening when they do not speak, because silence is where truth sits down. I heard Mom whisper very quietly as though speaking to darkness. "They're cutting back." Henry Father nodded. I did not hear the nod, but I saw the area around him sink a little, like his chair, pressed down half an inch. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know yet." His voice was weary but unbroken, as though he was carrying a full bucket of water and trying not to spill a drop. Silently, I poured Father a glass of water. He took it with both hands, said, "Thank you, son." I smelled a faint metallic scent from his hands, the smell of tools, the smell of a long day. I intended to ask what next, but the question got stuck, and my teeth broke into a clumsy nod. Grown-ups were silent, and I suddenly understood what internal cold meant. That night, I did not sleep early. I lay in bed, eyes open, looking at the ceiling, where an old stain looked like a cloud that would never drift. The sewing machine's hum went on slowed, then stopped entirely. I heard the porch door open, the sound of Father's footsteps on the steps. I sprang up and stood behind the screen door, gazing through its faint darkness. He sat there, as he had that afternoon, but one thing was different. Those broad shoulders were trembling slightly. His hand covered his eyes. I stood still, time stretching out like a rubber band pulled taut. There was no wind, no insects, no distant train whistle, only my father's broken breaths. For the first time I saw him cry. The night seemed to sway. I did not step forward. I feared if I touched him, the grief would shatter like a cracked bowl. I stood like that a long time until he wiped his face, drew a deep breath, and looked toward the darkness as if seeing a road he needed to walk. He rose, turned inward, and met me in the doorway. He placed his hand on my head, stroked it once, said, "Nothing." But from that hand, a quiet warmth passed through enough to let me understand I was not growing up alone. The next morning, Mom got up earlier than usual. The sewing table already held a pile of clothes she needed to finish. On the kitchen table lay a small note listing customers to visit, house numbers, names, the items. Mom's handwriting was round, neat, like a row of trees. She told Tom to watch Billy. She asked me to walk part of the way with her. I took along a spool of thread and a small pair of scissors, gentle weapons against lean times. Over the following weeks, our kitchen light stayed on late. Mom accepted sewing pieces deep into the night, the needle moving faster through fabric, and I learned that sometimes people don't need to say, "Don't worry," they just sit down and work. Father was home, more fixing little things. Hinges, windows, the creaky stair. He smiled less, but when I told him stories from school, he listened intently, occasionally saying, "Uh-huh," as if inserting a plank into the house while it shook. The town stayed the same, trucks rumbling in the morning, children kicking balls in the evening at the empty lot. But in our home, the air had changed. Every penny set on the table made a sound. I tried to learn faster, helping Mom thread needles, count stitches, fold clothes into bundles. Tom worked extra hours at the garage, hands coated in oil, eyes weary, but he teased me with a wink. Billy pasted color paper on the window frame, scrawling "Keep Going." Crudely, a little cheer, sign for the whole family. Some nights I saw Father sitting alone on the porch, staring at the night sky. I wanted to say something to make everything better, like people crank up the radio to drown out rain on the roof. But I couldn't find any words. Perhaps I didn't need to. Some nights just being present is enough. Sitting next to someone in silence is a way of saying, we walk this together. If I had to pick one image to capture the day my father lost his job, I would choose his eyes looking at the dark sky, fearful and patient, like someone waiting for his vision to adjust to darkness so he can see the way. Many years later, when walking through dark stretches of life, I learned to look like that, not hurried, not shouting, just waiting until my eyes catch the path. And if I must choose a sentence to conclude that night, I can only say that night was the first time I saw my father cry and the last. The photos in the album lack color, mostly black and white. Everyone's face is drowned in shadow, edges smudged by too many touches. But oddly, the smiles are clear, like drawn with white pencil. Mom rarely showed teeth when she smiled. Dad smiled with his eyes. Tom half smiled, Billy crooked because of a missing front tooth. As for me, in most pictures, I look solemn in a funny way, as though trying to seem grown up too soon. On the fourth page, bottom right corner, there is one very different photo. I am beaming, mouth wide open until my eyes squint to slits. In my hand is a large swirled candy bigger than my face, like a small plate. That photo to me is a window releasing smells of burnt sugar, the rustle of wrapping paper, and the sticky sweetness on my fingertips. The day they took that photo, the sky was clear and cool. The sun moved slowly, as though afraid to tire anyone. Mom led me down the street. She said, "Let's go fix a ring," softly, as though whispering. We passed shops with reflective windows where mother and child looked small, then enlarged in each corner. I didn't notice Mom's stronger grip on my hand. I just stared at the candy counter where every swirled lollipop seemed to call my name like little glowing lights in a display. We turned into a small shop whose glass door showed backwards, writing from the outside. The air smelled of metal and varnished wood. Inside there were old clocks and a few rings on green velvet pads. Mom spoke quietly to the shopkeeper, her eyes not meeting his. He nodded and slid out a tray. I stood near the door, eyes stuck on the candy counter in the shop next door, the colors calling me like playful lights. When the business was done, Mom said, "Go on, pick one." I looked suspiciously at such easy happiness. Choose my child? Mom smiled lightly, touching my back. I picked the biggest one, naturally a swirl of white, red, and blue that looked like someone twisted the rainbow into a stick. The seller wrapped it in cellophane, tied it with a red ribbon, and gave it to me. The smell of sugar and fruit burst out, and in that moment the world reduced to sweetness. Back on the porch, neighbors stopped by with an old Kodak. "Hold still," someone said. "Smile." I laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that bounced in the air. The shutter clicked and the world snapped back, the sun retreating down the steps. Wind flipping calendar pages, a bike rolling past the gate. I licked the candy swirl in my hand. Sugar stuck to my lip, and Mom dabbed it gently with a napkin. Days later, the photo dried. Mom glued it in the album using yellowed corners. Below it, she wrote in white pencil, "A July smile." That was all. I flipped that page over and over, not to admire myself, but to hear the click that had frozen a moment where all worries stayed outside the frame. Years later, when I was old enough to ask the harder questions, I learned That was the day Mom pawned her wedding ring. It had been on her hand for years, a thin circle like a promise, and she gave it up that morning to pay late bills and buy groceries. I asked if she was sad. She said, "A ring can be replaced." Then she looked at me and smiled, as if to say anything that could buy my child's laughter was never really gone. Since then, whenever I open the album, I pause at that photo longer. I follow the swirl of the candy, like tracing the orbit of growing up colors, leaning on each other to become beautiful. I see a boy laughing so hard he forgot to breathe, standing on the edge of a truth he hadn't yet grasped. And I hear behind the photo the shop bell, the soft voices, the velvet tray, sliding away like sounds left behind after the color fades, leaving only the shape of love. The album is thin yet full of memory. Photos near fences, riverbanks, some blurred by shaky hands, each flecked with time's dust, the kind that clings only to longing. When I run my fingers over the pages, they feel rough like an old gravel path. I tell myself to guard it because when memory dims, we need objects that remember for us. If someone flipped through the album with me now, they'd see I rarely smiled, wide, except in that one picture with the giant candy swirl. Maybe because I was holding something bright, or maybe because I hadn't yet learned how to ask the hardest questions. Either way, that photo stayed catching all the summer's light into one moment sent forward in time to me. And if I had to say it out loud, I'd only confess, I smiled that day because I didn't know it was the day my mother had to sell her wedding ring. Still remember the old short oil lamp with a fabric wick. Mom would unscrew the cat-pour kerosene slowly, each drop stretching time. When it caught fire, the room held a tiny sun, yellow and soft, just enough to see each other, but not everything. Our shadows stretched long on the wall arms and legs grown older by light. Those nights, the radio stayed off. The television was a dark box. We pulled our chairs closer. Tom made paper puppets and held them to the lamp rabbit's wolves' trains. Billy hid candy, left scribbled treasure maps. Turn left at the third step. Go straight till you hear a cat meow. We searched the house in low laughter muffled by the dim light. Sometimes Father told ghost stories not to scare, but so we would clasp hands. He lowered his voice, stretching each word, so the monster would step slowly out of the flickering shadow. I don't remember the plot clearly. I only remember the smell of kerosene, the wick crackling, and Billy's hand tightening over mine. At each bend in the tale, suddenly, Mom would clear her throat and say, "Okay, whoever is scared, look at me." Just like that, all the monsters lost their jobs. But the best part of those nights without electricity was when Mom sang. No background music, no scrolling lyrics on screen, just her voice. A strand of silk, warm, unstrained. She sang melodies everyone knew, but nobody remembered the name sometimes, forgetting the words and going la 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 through a line, then laughing at herself. I didn't mind that forgetting. I loved how she'd stretch a line longer than usual, letting the note drift through silences like a boat gliding on a nighttime river. Outside on the porch, insects strummed their instruments, crickets, tapping like pins on the night's page. Occasionally a truck would pass up the street, its headlights sweeping a thin beam across the window, then retracting, leaving darkness smoother in its wake. The kitchen held still steeped in the smell of fried shallots lingering from dinner, mingled with kerosene-warm wood, a scent unique to powerless nights. A scent I once thought was deprivation, but now consider a gift adults never quite wrapped. I used to envy homes with generators. Their windows spilled light into the street like a quiet boasting. As for us, we huddled together, learning to see one another by scant illumination. Each person came into sharper relief in the small details, the faint scar on Tom's forehead, Mother's eyebrows casting shadow over her eyelids, Father's scratched hands resting gently on his knees. I realized that too much light sometimes causes people to forget to look. When the cold deepened, Mother moved the oil lamp closer and said, "Sit tight so you'll be warm." We pulled up blankets, nestled into one another like kittens. Father whittled a block of wood into a little toy boat, letting shavings fly like snow. Billy glued his eyes to the boat. Tom begged for the old knife to carve windows. I just sat still, listening to knife on wood, watching in my mind roads by rivers I had never traveled, shores I had never stepped foot on. Late at night, the lamp's wick shrank. Mother pinched and trimmed it. The bluish smoke curled upward, then everything sank into a gentle dark. "Go to sleep," she said. We lay down and turned to watch a patch of sky through the window. With no other lights, the stars thickened, came nearer. I counted stars like counting coins, feeling rich in a way no one measures. I drifted to sleep unaware, holding in my mind the honey-colored halo of the lamp flame, the half-song Mother left off. At the time, I thought our home was lacking. Grown up now, I know instead that I received something rare: nights, quiet enough to hear another's heartbeat close to mine. And now, through many television channels, through shining screens, I can still close my eyes and see the dark room glitter with her voice. I remember Mother's voice more vividly than any television show that followed. Immediately after Thanksgiving, Mother brought out a cardboard box into the living room. Inside was an old cardboard Christmas tree, its branches faintly numbered. Tom became chief engineer. He slotted each branch into the trunk, twisted to a line, stepped back with a critical eye. Billy strung popped corn into garlands. I tied little faux berry ornaments from foil paper, the cheapest jewelry, but glowing brightest when the yellow lights came on. The star atop the tree was a clumsily cut piece of cardboard wrapped in silver foil from the inside of a cereal box. Father stood on a chair, placed the star, then froze in place for a few seconds for the family to admire. "Straight now?" he asked. "Yes," Mother answered, though it leaned slightly toward the window. I thought leaning toward the window is fine, like the tree was straining to hear the seasonal wind. Our gifts were mostly handmade. I remember Tom's promise vouchers to Mother. One read one dishwashing day without complaint. Another fixed the creaky cupboard door, text large and slanted like someone in rush. Billy wrapped his drawings in old newspaper, taped with crisscrossed strips, writing the recipient's name in red marker. I sometimes gave a half-finished knitted scarf with one long thread trailing like a ship's rope. Mother unwrapped it, smiled, immediately wore it, letting the dangling thread hang as if anchoring something. We wrapped gifts in newspaper. The thick Sunday edition served for the whole family. I liked picking pages with large photos, a new car, a bride, smiling a beach, then wrapping boxes, tying colored thread. Those boxes could not hide secrets. Wallpaper was thin but preserved a sense of anticipation. We laid the gifts beneath the cardboard tree, counting each bundle as though counting stars for our home. On Christmas Eve, Mother simmered a larger pot of soup than usual, adding more potatoes and carrots. Father chopped a few firewood sticks. The stove crackled like an amateur musician, earnest in effort. We dimmed lights, turned on a string of small yellow bulbs, each like a grain of light, letting the room drift into a gentle glow that made even chipped chairs feel warm. Tom read passages aloud from a borrowed winter book. Billy interrupted with witty comments, so the whole house laughed. When it was time to open presents, we were not hurried. Mother said, one gift per person, open slowly to hear the paper. We peeled, and newspaper rustling became music. I received a hardcover journal Tom made from a cut pastry box, its corners patched with cloth to prevent tearing. Billy got a wooden car, Father carved all weak wheels, squeaking in delight. Mother opened my gift, the half-finished scarf, draped it around me and said, "What's unfinished? Wear it warm. That way it's completed too." 1 year snow fell thickly. The window fogged from our breath as we pressed faces to draw circles, looking out more clearly. I saw blinking Christmas lights in the neighbors' windows, heard somewhere a church bell. Inside we exchanged tentative hugs, because at some age hugs need courage, and felt warmth instantly. I do not recall expensive gifts I received. I remember clearly Father's hand on my shoulder, giving a gentle squeeze, as if saying, "Are you okay?" After midnight, as the kitchen cooled, Mother gathered wrapping paper, flattened, clean scraps to reuse next year. I helped her, the room suddenly feeling wider because laughter still lingered in the air. The cardboard tree stood there, star-skewed popcorn garlands, drying yellow lights, fading. I thought perhaps gifts were invented to teach us to open our hands. We, having little to wrap, learned to open our hearts early. Many years later, I passed through bright Christmas seasons, retail windows littered with light. I still buy gifts for my children, still wrap carefully, still write cards. But there are nights when I turn off the television, ask them to sit closer, open a bag of popcorn, string, kernels, hang them on a branch outdoors. The wind rustles the kernels faintly like a child's gentle applause. I tell them of the cardboard tree, the half-made scarf, the wooden car, and laughter that doesn't require batteries. Feel time slow soften, and someone breathes deeply. Those early holidays were never abundant, but they never lacked one thing: eyes. We looked at one another longer than normal, perhaps because in that yellow light people are easier to see as home. And in every awkward gift, someone offered their most precious thing time. And if I must reveal a small secret of those old winter seasons, it is: some gifts are not opened by hands, but by the heart. Leaving the living room with the cardboard tree, I wandered back into the kitchen, the place always warmer than the rest of the house, even when the stove was off. The floor tiles were mismatched, one cracked black like a lightning streak, another scuffed from sliding chairs. The countertop was a floral formica sheet, corners bubbling like waves. The old gas stove sputtered. Turning the knob often commanded a few clicks before the flame would ignite. Every time that happened, Mother would lean in, shielding the flame with her palm, like hiding a secret. The kitchen window faced the backyard, its wooden frame flaking paint. On the sill sat a basil plant grown in a reused coffee can. In the morning, sunlight slipped over turned-over's cups, making them gleam like they smiled. On a wall corner hung a cast-iron skillet worn dark from years of use. Beside it, a glass jar held saved cooking fat, sealed with a repurposed lid, the house's treasury of flavor. The smell of the kitchen always found me. Some days it was the scent of golden fried shallots just at the edge of browning, so strong I could guess tonight's menu from the porch. Other days the smell of buttered toast, its crumb center warm crust, dusted like fallen snow. Other times the smell of stewed beans with dried bay leaves that Mother hid in a tin, humble yet elegant, like a simple garment sewn with care. Mother cooked in her own way, less measuring, more listening. She would taste, squint, add a little water, sprinkle salt, as though seasoning a story into the pot. No restaurant can cook like my mother, even just beans, I used to say when I was young, and I still say it now, not because Mother's beans followed special proportions, but because they know the path to fill me when I think myself empty. In the morning, the coffee percolator burbled soft like someone tapping on the shell of the earth. Father clinked his spoon on the cup, dropped sugar stirred once to wake the aroma. I sat at the table watching dust drift through slanted sunlight, listening to the calendar page, tersh in the living room. Mother placed buttered toast on the table. The butter slid to the edge, and I scooped it back with a knife, gathering the first quiet moments of the day into the center of the table. At noon, when the house emptied, the kitchen spoke in whispers, the fridge humming like an old man, breathing water, dripping steadily, wind slipping through window cracks, bringing the scent of grass. Often I sat alone, opening Mother's tin of handwritten recipes, really just flour-stained scraps, thick with notes. Cornbread, 1 cup cornmeal, 1 cup of milk minus a splash. How much is a splash? Only Mother knew. In the afternoon, when the sky turned heavy, Mother sautéed shallows. In the cast iron pan, added soaked beans, stirred, poured in bone broth, and set the lid. Steam tapped the pot like a clock, and the smell slipped into every room through the living room, the drying laundry out to the porch, and even the fence. I remember the day I brought Linda home, just the girl I liked back then. She paused at the door and said, "What smells so warm?" I smiled and said, "That's the smell of home." Dinner beans went in the center. We tore bread and dipped each in our rhythm. Mother often scanned the table, asking softly, "Is it okay, even if a bit bland?" Tom nodded. Billy reached for salt and sprinkled, still praising. I saw Mother breathe out softly, like an artisan placing the last brick of the day. The kitchen was also where Mother mended clothes, taped books, kept notes. On the cupboard door, she stuck receipts with clear tape, the neighbor's phone number, and a small photo of Father smiling, his eyes creasing like streaks of sunlight. Every time I passed that cupboard, I felt our family preserved by cheap bits of tape, resilient and enduring. Once the stove broke, no flame knob spun loosely. The family stumbled as though losing their dictionary. Father dismantled the stove hands, black with oil. I stood beside him holding a flashlight. Mother hugged a tin of beans, half-seasoned steam warm on her face. Metal clinked, a faint gas smell wafted, then suddenly snap, a small blue flame leapt. "It's working," Father said, his voice lighter, as if he'd lifted something heavy for us. We applauded quietly, as though watching a modest fireworks show. Years later, I ate in fine restaurants, tasted intricate dishes, learned names of spices in foreign tongues. But whenever the wind blows or when my heart is tired, I crave a simple bowl of beans. I stand in my own kitchen now, hit the gas light, quickly, fry shallots, pour canned beans, sprinkle salt, reach for the cupboard, and there still is a small jar of reserved fat lid, an old can. I take one tiny spoonful, just enough for scent to rise from memory. If anyone asks why I remember that old kitchen so well, I will say, because there the time cooked days of hunger into days of plenty. There people learned to love through small acts, turning the flame just so tasting, sprinkling pepper, drawing chairs close. And there I learned a sentence I've never seen myself speak out loud. I can still smell that whenever I remember Mother. From the kitchen that smelled of fried shallots and the soft click of the gas stove, I stepped onto the porch and realized I had reached the age where I wanted to contribute something, however small, to the family pot. I began with what my two hands could do, washing cars on Saturday mornings, mowing lawns on Sunday afternoons, raking leaves in the fall, and shoveling snow in early winter. It was not much, but it was my money. The kind that left my hands smelling faintly of cheap soap and my thumb sore from holding the broom too long. The old man down the street said, "Scrub the wheels well, they hold the most dirt." I nodded, water splashing on my pants, soap bubbles flowing down the curb like tiny streams. The sun reflected off the hood, and I laughed at my warped reflection like a comic book character. Mowing smelled of wet grass blades humming the lines I cut straight like a new resolve. Some days I earned coins, sometimes a folded dollar, simple money, yet it made me feel a bit taller. I saved it. An empty glass jar on my nightstand began to chime softly with each coin I dropped in. Every night I counted not to track loss, but to hear the steady beat of my own heart, like the mower's rhythm. I did not dream of toys, I dreamed of books, old, worn, their pages soft, and someone's name written in blue ink on the first page. At the library's monthly sale, I picked one with a worn spine. The librarian smiled and said, 25 cents. I counted the coins and left with a book in my bag, feeling so proud I wanted to walk around town just to hear it rustle. At home, I set it on the kitchen table. Mom, salting a pot, dried her hands and opened the book. She read the title slowly, like meeting a new friend. "I bought it myself," I said. She smiled, nodded, then pulled out a small picture frame that used to hold our family photo. She opened the back and tucked my first earned coin behind the photo, right next to our smiles. "The first one is to remember the effort," she said. "The rest you spend how you want." From then on, every time I passed by, that coin gave off a tiny glint, like a friend nodding hello. I kept washing, mowing, raking. Summer passed in straight-cut lawns, sun-streaked shirts, and book pages open on the porch. I read with my hand shading the light, listening to that coin quietly balancing a dream behind me. Every now and then I would buy another book or a good pencil or a hard-covered notebook to write those early thoughts. I did not know how to tell anyone. Mom never interfered. She just occasionally flipped the picture frame over to make sure the coin still sat there, like checking the heartbeat of a sleeping child. Dad would ask, "How far have you read?" I would share a few lines and he would nod. Just enough encouragement to make me feel I was headed in the right direction. One breezy afternoon, I helped an old lady at the end of the street fix her fence. She paid in coins and handed me a small loaf of bread, saying, "Take it home and eat it warm." As I walked back, I thought, turns out working does not just earn money. It gives you something else, the feeling of being useful. That night, I opened the jar and dropped in a few more coins. They clinked and then went quiet. I stood still, listening to the echo, and felt like I had just placed a brick on the path leading to tomorrow. Years later, when I became a teacher, I often told my students doing odd jobs taught me something you cannot easily buy: gratitude. Not just gratitude for the person who paid me, but for the labor that passed through my own hands. Every soap scent on my skin, every scrape on my wrist, every grass stain on my heel, they taught me that money is just the shadow of labor, and that the true value lies in how your chest warms up after finishing something, no matter how small. One night, while pouring a glass of water in the kitchen, I suddenly noticed the coin still sitting in the frame beside the photo of my smiling parents. I finally understood why Mom had placed it there, to remind me not to confuse having with earning. Having money is one thing. Growing up a little is what truly matters. I placed my hand on the edge of the frame, felt the coolness of the wood, and felt my heart lighten, and I said to myself, like jotting down a clear and simple note, that was the moment I realized poverty is not as frightening as forgetting to be grateful.